not going away, right? Isn't that a good thing? Love God, love others. It sounds like something we should be doing within the church. And so as we wrap this series up, we're moving right into our vision and mission in the church in general, but also what we're doing for 2016. And we started to share that a couple of weeks ago. I have some big news for you that one of the things that we're working at in the next year is that our goal is to raise $10,000 as a church. We're doing that through big fundraisers, one of which is a mud run that we're working on and planning.
Yeah.
You guys have already expressed some interest in that. Isn't that awesome? And I have to say, it was amazing as your pastor to say, I feel a burden to raise $10,000, that to give half of that money away, and that we're going to do this as a church, and people got excited. Isn't that awesome? Because so often when we say we're going to raise money, people groan. But this idea of loving others and loving God, loving others as ourselves, it's just absolutely core to who we are as a church. And so throughout the next year, we'll be working to raise that money and to do this as a church, and then giving that away, but looking at the mud run and the opportunities to meet neighbors, friends, people that we've never met, and to minister and to work together, it's pretty cool. So there's some stuff coming up in our vision and mission here that I'm really excited about. But today we're laying a little bit more of the groundwork for why we do what we do, because this is just key. If we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, then along the way people get frustrated, they start to lose energy, maybe they're not as going as well as they would like it to see. So your leadership team always asks the question, who are we and where is God leading us? It's something that we ask on a monthly basis. We meet every month. We rarely reschedule, and I can't think of any meetings that we've missed. Because we take our job as your leadership team very, very seriously. We want to not just set the direction for the church that we think the church should go, but to set the direction where God is leading us. And so that is our continual prayer. And one of the ways that we look to see where God is leading is to pay attention to the church and our community to see what God is doing. And we don't just do this within a vacuum. We look around, we talk to people, we ask, what is God doing? Where is God at work? And so a lot of our leadership team meetings are fun. I share that because you guys aren't all on the leadership team, otherwise that would be the church, right? The leadership team is appointed leaders within the church. But I can tell you, I love our leadership team meetings, not because we sit around and just talk in fellowship, which we do, but we also get to talk about where God is working, what we see happening, how we see people growing. Isn't those fun conversations? And those God leading us too. So I can tell you that with certainty, your leadership desires one thing. First and foremost, always. That is that we love God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and we love others as ourselves. That God directs everything that we do. Okay. That's kind of cool, isn't it? I was sharing that, I had credentials this past week, and I was sharing with some of my colleagues what we were doing. And I only had like 30 seconds. We had an extremely busy meeting. And I had about 30 seconds to share. I said, hey guys, this is what we're doing next year at Cornerstone. And they're like, can we come too? I said, yeah. They were excited. They're like, this sounds like a blessing. I said, I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it. So what a privilege it is to be doing this. Hey, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to Hosea. That's where we're at today. Hosea chapter 6, if you have your Bibles. One of the book of the 12 minor prophets. And I think it's good to do Old Testament preaching as well. I don't do as much of it as I should. But we're back there today, so that's a good thing. Hosea chapter 6. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 10. And we're really going to focus on verses 4 through 6. So when we're done reading this, don't just close your Bibles, put it away, assume you can sit back and coast through this, okay? So Hosea chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. And just a little bit of background as you're turning there. This story is about a prophet whose name is Hosea. And God tells Hosea to take a wife. But to not just take any wife, God commands Hosea to take a wife named Gomer, who was also a prostitute. And so this story shares their life together. It's full of heartbreak, there's some joy, there's pain, there's sorrow, but it gives us an excellent picture of God's relationship with Israel. Because what do we know about Israel? They weren't always real faithful to God, right? God was always faithful to Israel, but Israel wasn't always faithful to God. In fact, Israel had a habit of wandering far away from God and forgetting what God had done for them. And even turning after other gods. Well, the story of Hosea is exactly that, between a husband and wife. Hosea marries Gomer. Gomer leaves. She chases after other men. And it causes pain and heartbreak in Hosea's life. And eventually Hosea welcomes her back. So it's an awesome story from start to finish if you want to sit down and read it. In fact, it kind of rivals most daytime soap operas. Much older. So Hosea chapter 6. Israel is in a bad time. They have wandered far away. And imagine this, they've gotten far away from God and all of a sudden things are going poorly. They've turned their back on God. They find themselves in the midst of war. And here's what they say in verse 6. Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but He will heal us. He has injured us, but He will bind up our wounds. After 2 days He will revive us. On the third day He will restore us, so that we may live in His presence. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge Him. As surely as the sun rises, He will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. What can I do with you, Ephraim? What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. Therefore I cut you to pieces with my prophets. I killed you with the words of my mouth. My judgments flash like lightning upon you. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, an acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. Like Edom, they have broken the covenant. They were unfaithful to me there. Gilead is a city of wicked men, stained with footprints of blood. As marauders lie in ambush for a man, so do bands of priests. They murder on the road to Shechem, committing shameful crimes. I have seen a horrible thing in the house of Israel. There Ephraim is given to prostitution, and Israel is defiled. Rough passage, right? Rough passage here. Israel remembered God when things were going really bad. Now, before we are too quick to blame Israel, let's be honest with ourselves. Have we done that? Have we said, you know what, things are going pretty bad, maybe I should pray? It's happened in my life. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who this has happened to. We seem to do pretty well. Things are going in a smooth spot in life. We say, you know what, God, I got this one. Take a little bit of a break. You can rest, God. There's lots of people who need your help. I'm good. Or God, if they don't need help, just take a little vacation. I've got this handled. And we go on our own for a period of time. And then it all starts to unravel. And we find ourselves scrambling in our anxiety builds. At least that's what happens in my life. My anxiety builds. And I start to get kind of panicky. And someone will say, well, have you prayed? Of course I'm praying. I know better than that. You know, God, maybe we should talk. Things are going really bad, God. And that's what Israel has done time and time again. And here they are again, only this time things are really bad. They're in the midst of a war. And they say, hey, let's go back to God. Yeah, He's disciplined us, but He'll fix us. And in 2 to 3 days, almost instantly, everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be fine, just as it should be. Let us acknowledge the Lord. He's going to save us. That kind of relationship with God is much more like a relationship with a genie. Or, as I watch tons of Dr. Stuffins and Sophia the First, it's like having a fairy godmother or a princess or a fairy or anything you want to put in there. It's a magical relationship where we assume as soon as everything falls apart, we just say, hey God, you know what, it's kind of bad. Just fix this for me so we can go back to living. It's what Israel has done time and time again. It's what we have done. turning God into their personal genie. And Israel only really acknowledges God when they need something. The picture that we're given here is that they cry out when things are bad, and when it's okay, they do it on their own. Really easy to put them down until we look in the mirror. So let's be careful about that. Israel does it time and time again. So here is God's response. And I want you to hear the question, the tiredness, the weariness, the worn-inness. What can I do with you, Ephraim? What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. So what's God's response? I'm glad to hear from you again. No. Doesn't it sound almost like the question of a worried parent? Or the question of a worn-out leader? Man, we have been trying and trying and trying and they don't get it. Or what do I do with you? My children keep fighting. Even when they're sitting next to each other on the stage and they're giving a hug. One hugs, one screams. I can relate to this at times. I love the fact that God just doesn't say, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. I knew you were coming back, we're good. We'll pick up right where we left off. What we get is this glimpse into the heart of God. That this unfaithfulness on the part of Israel impacts God. In fact, how does God describe their relationship? Did you catch the way God describes Israel's love? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. How many of you would want that kind of love from a spouse? How many of us would want that kind of love from a child? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't want that, right? Because that kind of love is not very good love at all. It is love that disappears instantly. It is here. It is gone. Before you even realize that they're back loving you again, they've already disappeared. And what God says to Israel is, that is your love. It is here and gone before I even know it's back. It goes so quickly, it fades as soon as there's anything going on. That is God's description of Israel's love. But did you see in your capture here Israel's description of God's faithfulness? It's actually verse 3. Israel is speaking, and they say, as surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains, like the spring rains that water the earth. Translation, Israel says we can always count on God. God says, can't always count on Israel. It's this idea of a love relationship, of a marriage between God and people, where there is faithfulness on one end and infidelity on the other. And many scholars have debated about whether or not the story of Hosea and Gomer is a literal story, or if it was a story to help Israel understand what they had done with God. Either way, it's heartbreaking. What a marriage. What a faith. And we're not throwing stones, right? Because we've all been there. We've all been there. I bet some of us have friends that we're thinking of right now. Friendships that fall right into this. That people who come around as soon as they need something, and the second they get it, they're gone. Or maybe, if we're being really honest, we've been those kind of friends that have showed up because we needed something and then we're gone. Either way, whether it is a romantic relationship, whether it is a friendship, or it is a spiritual relationship, it's not really a dynamic we want to be part of, wherever it's at. It's not a good, healthy kind of relationship. And so verse 6, chapter 6, verse 6, this is the climax of Hosea. It's the central point. Everything from one begins up to this. Everything from the end comes down from this. Because God finally tells them again what it is that he really wants. Verse 6, for I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. It's the pivotal point. God says, this is it. This is the heart. This is what you need to do. When we talk about having a relationship and it being a good relationship, man, guys, this is all you've got to do. Love me and love others. Doesn't that sound simple? If only it was. If only it was as simple as it sounds. Because let's be honest, sacrifice and burnt offerings, they're religious obligations. It's kind of like being a Christian and knowing you go to church on Christmas and Easter. Right? If you're a good Christian, you've got to be in church on Christmas and Easter. You can never go the rest of the year, but on Christmas and Easter, you better show up. Because that's what Christians do. Well, in the same point, the way they worship burnt offerings and sacrifices, it's the way they worshiped. It was their religious obligation. It was how they paid their dues so that God would remember them, so that they could say, yeah, we still worship God this year. Yeah, I still follow God. So they did their religious sacrifices. And God says, forget the religious obligations. If you really want a good relationship with me, like I want with you, if you want to be faithful to me the way I have been faithful to you, this is it. Acknowledge me. By the way, does that just mean once? It's like a continual acknowledgement, right? Walk with me. And is it just showing mercy one time? How often do you think it is? It's probably every morning? Just mercy every morning? I could maybe do that. The rest of the day would be less like. It's mercy every moment, right? It is mercy every moment. I'm just picking Michelle. Because it is hard to be merciful all day long. Especially when people drive you crazy. Now maybe you guys don't deal with that. I deal with that. I have no problem admitting that people drive me crazy at times. Not you, though. It's everybody else. And it's never my children. And it's absolutely never Jen. And I never drive her crazy. Mercy is tough to extend. And I think sometimes it would be nice if we had a mercy tank. That when we got to the bottom, we could say, you know what, I gave out all my mercies for today. See me tomorrow. But that's just not how it works. Because that would really fall under this idea of religious obligations. There's been a growing trend, I'd say within the past 10 years, of people saying, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I can understand that because the church has made a bit of a shift. As I grew up in the church, I knew all the religious rules. I knew everything you should do, and more importantly, I knew everything that you shouldn't do. But I didn't always have a real close relationship with God. I knew all the right things to say. And I knew all the right people to hang out with. And I definitely knew how to look churchy. Wear the right clothes, show up at the right times, say the right things, hang out with the right people, and you've got it made. That is religion in our current day. Spirituality says there's something beyond that. There is a connection that needs to happen. Now here's the thing. Within this, spirituality is very open. Within Christianity, our spirituality is connected to God. For me, the way I understand it. So it's not about religion in doing the rules. It's not about playing the game. It's not about just showing up on Christmas and Easter. Being a creaster or a seedy Christian, however you'd like to put it. I prefer creasters. You know, they crease through the rest of the year then. It's not just about doing everything right when people are looking. It's about a deeper connection with us and God on a daily basis. And so God lays it out for Israel. This is what I want from you. I've tried with my prophets. I have tried sharing this with you. I have shown it to you. I have been with you time after time again. But guys, you need to hear this is the heart of it. This is what I'm looking for in our relationship. Be merciful to people around you and acknowledge me every day. Walk with me. Jesus actually quotes this verse twice. Matthew chapter 9 and also Matthew chapter 12. In Matthew chapter 9, he is criticized for the company he is keeping. Now, Jesus is doing amazing things. He's healing people. People are coming and experiencing God, and they are seeing a spiritual connection with God that they were never able to find through religion. They had done the religious sacrifices, the religious obligations, but people were connecting with Jesus because Jesus brought them something that they weren't used to seeing in church or within the temple, within the synagogue. And so as they're connecting and following with Jesus, it's not always the people who were welcomed within the temple. It was the tax collectors. It was prostitutes. It was Gentiles. It was everyone who was kept at bay by religion. And so Jesus is taking a lot of criticism from the Pharisees for the company he's keeping. Guess what he says? He quotes Hosea 6:6. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And then he adds to it, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And then we go a few pages back in Matthew chapter 12. The Pharisees condemn Jesus again because as Jesus and the disciples are walking through a grain field, they put their hands out, they pluck some grain, and they eat them. And apparently they plucked one grain too many. One of the Pharisees was there counting, keeping track of everything that Jesus was doing. By the way, I would argue that that Pharisee was probably working, unless it was just a burdensome joy to track Jesus in what he was doing. And they called Jesus for working too much on the Sabbath. And he quotes it again. If you understood what this meant, you wouldn't be wasting the time on what you're wasting it on. It is easy as a church to get off track. It is why your leadership team goes back to those questions every month. Where is God leading? What is God doing? Where is God calling us to go? And guys, that's discussions we have every month, right? Because our leadership team members are in here. They're quietly nodding their heads. Thinking, do we have that every month? If we don't have it every month, and I'm sure that we do, it is really close. It's always at the center of those discussions. See, the Pharisees were really good at following the rules. They knew how everything worked, and they were even better at enforcing them. But Jesus said, this just isn't where we're going to be. They missed God in the process. Man, it's so easy to do religion. It is hard to be loyal, and it is hard to love. What do you think? You think I'm wrong in that? Is it hard to be loyal? I think it is. Is it hard to love all the time? I'm so glad you're like shaking your head yes, because if you just said no, we'd have talked about your enemies. Loving enemies. That's work, right? Loving people who are mean. That is work. Even loving people who just rub you the wrong way. There's nothing that you can really find. You just don't click with them. It can be difficult. Yeah, this is hard work. Loving God and loving others, it is work. As I was thinking about this, we would love to say that it doesn't exist in the church today, but it does. I have a good colleague in ministry, and he shared with me a few years ago he was applying and was accepted as an associate pastor in a church somewhere in the U.S. We won't go any more in depth than that. And as the senior pastor was installing my friend, the new associate pastor that day, just moments before they walk out onto the stage, the senior pastor handed my friend a script and his wife a script. It was the questions they were going to go over. And on the script was the answers that my friend was to give. It gets better. On his wife's script were the times that she was to smile and nod politely. I can't even make that up. They had already agreed, they had already committed, so they stayed for a period of time. But in that period, he learned that he and his wife were not allowed to go to the movie theater in town. they had to go to the one in the next town over. Friends, that's religion. That's playing games. That is not what Christ called us to be about, and it's definitely not what God wants, according to Hosea. What God wants is something so much more. But be ready for it, because if we're going to enter into that kind of love relationship, it's going to change who we are. I was thinking about that. Jen and I celebrated 10 years of marriage this week. Isn't that awesome? You know, I'm a very blessed man. I love my wife. I love my children. But I look back, and I am not the same person I was when we got married.
Amen.
It's one of the many things I love about Cornerstone, that we do church together, right? We do this together. I was thinking back, number one, I had more hair. That's completely unrelated. That's completely unrelated. But there are many things that are different. And some of them I never anticipated. Can you believe that when I cook dinner now, I make vegetables? You know why? Jen's taught me they're important. She's convinced that vegetables are good for me and that we should have them. And so when I cook dinner, I include vegetables. Imagine that. Some of them I still don't even like, and I eat them. The other night, and I couldn't believe this, I caught this like mid-bite. I have an awful habit of snacking at night. And I love popcorn. I love chips. Ice cream's pretty good too. And pizza tops it all. And so I sat down with my evening snack, and I wasn't really thinking much about it. When I looked down in my bowl, you know what I had there? Dried fruit. And it wasn't bad. It's impacts that have happened. Another one started shortly after marriage. As a bachelor, I can count the number of times I made my bed. Once. The day I bought my sheets, I put them on, and it was made. And that was about it. But, well, maybe a couple times. They were washed a few times. You're concerned, aren't you? She really has done a lot of work. But now, I'd love to say every morning the bed is made, but at least before Jen gets home from work. The bed's made. Not because it matters as much to me as I know it does to her. Now, I have to tell you, I notice when my bed's not made now. As a bachelor, never noticed. I notice when vegetables are missing. And I notice that I feel better when I eat dried fruit rather than potato chips. It's all because of the impact of spending 10 years every day with my wife that she's had on my life. Now, those are just simple ones. There's a lot bigger ones. But when we spend time with someone on a daily basis, they change who we are, for good or for bad. And God doesn't say, follow the rules and get better. God says, spend time with me every day, and you'll become more like me. It's the difference between religion and spirituality. It's the difference between follow the rules and love God and love others. We can follow the rules and be the same 10 years later. But if we love God, and if we love others, I guarantee you will change. Because it is impossible to love someone and to spend that much time with them and to not be impacted. This is who we are at Cornerstone. I've shared time and time again, people say, well, you guys are doing some crazy things. Yeah, it's okay. It's a way that we use it to love our neighbor. And as we do this, we don't see anything in here that conflicts with loving God. One of the changes that I absolutely love about the church since I started is that there is barely a day during the week here where the church was quiet. Claudia's in here every day. She was coming up to help me watch the kids for a few minutes, and she's like, I'll be there as soon as I can get out of here, because you know what it's like leaving a church. I said, I know. Because there's always people here. When I started, sometimes the only person I saw was the secretary, and she was the only person I was the only person that she saw. What a change to go from nobody being in the building to people being here all the time. And guess what? It's people that don't come Sunday morning. They're using the building because this building isn't ours. It's God's building. We use it. And so it's some of the vision and the mission from the upcoming year. Are you getting excited? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you everything today. I'll come back over the next couple of weeks. You like that? You like that? Yeah. So I look at this. What sets the bar for everything is Christ saying, love God with all that you are, and love others as yourself. And God sharing through Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifices. Hey, let's close in prayer. Okay? And today, as we're praying, if you have struggled with following rules instead of loving God, then I'd encourage you to pray. I'd encourage you to ask for forgiveness, to really invite God into that one-on-one relationship that changes us the way marriage changes the spouse. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for time together. God, it is so easy to follow the rules. It can be so difficult to follow you and to love you. God, help us to love you with all that we are. Help us to love others as much as we love ourselves. God, we know that you desire mercy and steadfast love.